the Best Damn Podcast. I am your host, John Keene. As always, I would like to thank you guys for joining me. Ask that you please add, follow, and check us out. Instagram, Facebook, Best Damn Podcast, Twitter, The Real Best Damn, and wherever you watch this from, wherever you catch this, please make sure to hit the like, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and share the link. That is absolutely the number one way to support this channel, support me, support my work, is by sharing the links, right? Manually sharing, especially in today's age with, all the censorship and all that. Keep in mind, guys, we are completely viewer powered. So if you would like to donate and support to the channel, you can do that by going to the links in the description. I also will pin them at the top of the comment section. That's PayPal, Cash App, Facebook Messenger, or Patreon. So yeah, and everybody who does, support and give and all that good stuff, big ups, big thanks to you guys. Like, honestly, just couldn't do it without you. I mean, we've been demonetized on every platform. So you literally are how this shit goes and how I eat. So I am grateful, beyond grateful. So tonight I got a pretty cool topic, and I'm sure I didn't promote this or anything like that. So it'll probably take a second for a few people to get in here, but we're going to talk about humanity, and its possible enslavement, right? And I think the real question is, and so many people are always talking about, what happens if, aliens attack or aliens invade? And, so many people have different opinions when it comes to extraterrestrials. A lot of people believe that they're already here, not only that they're here, but they're native to this planet and that they've been here for thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of years, right? And we got to kind of look at this from a few different angles. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to let this breathe a second and go into it, and look at it from multiple perspectives, So we have the concept of, they created us. Extraterrestrials were actually the ones who created us. And, I think if we look at it from that measure, we can be fairly certain that there's enough, ancient texts, mythologies, historical accounts that, point to that, right? They allude to some type of entity or some type of presence coming from the heavens, right? And having something to do with our creation, and not just our creation, but, it's almost as if, especially, in the time before time, how many resets we've had here on Earth, nobody will ever fucking know. I do feel like we have been reset as a society more times than we can probably count, which, this gets right into the whole ET shit anyways, right? Because I do believe there is a power, behind all of this that is, manipulating and influencing humanity to do things like, have these great resets and these mass cullings of the population, right? So we know in a lot of different accounts, and you could even look at the Bible, right? It says that in the beginning we were created by the Elohim, right? And I pointed this out before. I'm not going to get all deep into this aspect, but, Elohim means supreme magistrates, right? This is the luminaries, the heavenly hosts, it's the angels, so it's like, it's literally telling you flat out in the Bible, that these star beings, these angels are what actually created mankind, what actually created humanity, and this pisses off a lot of Christians because they're like, no, God created us, and it's like, well, if we want to look at that, it's not incorrect that God, the Father, the Spirit did create us, right? because God is a spirit. So our spirit came from God. God created the spiritual aspect of us, if we look at it, with that school of thought. But as in a physical sense, in a physical manner, fuck it, I got it. So in a physical sense, sorry about that, in a physical sense, in a physical manner, it appears as if something else actually intervened into the creations of us. If we look at Enki's World Order, otherwise known as the Lost Book of Enki, it actually talks about how these Anunnaki, which, these are the shining ones, or those from the heavens came, right? How, and they're supposed to be this supreme, technologically advanced fucking race, right? Coming from the planet Nibiru. And no matter what you believe on this, whether Zecharia Sitchin is fucking full of shit, or, you believe it's just a fairy tale, whatever, right? I do believe that we, especially our, the ancient people, they didn't just make up shit because it sounded good, right? And when you look at all across the globe, all across the world, you have very, very similar, almost exact accounts of not only, who the creators were of humanity, who the lords or the gods are, right? You also have these same accounts of different cataclysms and catastrophes and cycles coming to an end and a close as well, right? Whether this is, the Great Deluge, right? Or a million other things. And isn't it crazy how they use similar names in a lot of these mythos as well, So we know that it says that the Anunnaki already had one species that was created. And it's like, I've talked about this before, how I believe, and there's a couple ways of looking at this, like, the extraterrestrials could absolutely be us. The gods could be us in a past cycle, right? In a past cycle, we could be those gods, and if you look at every kind of creation story in every culture, they have different versions of this. The Greek have the primordials, right? Then they have the Titans and the Olympians, right? So these are different levels of gods, right? That come one after the other, right? The primordials is, Gaia and Uranus, right? Which was water and earth, which created basically the very bare bones minimum of creation. This is like our primordial ooze state, right? Then all of a sudden we had the Titans, which, would probably be akin to the planets, right? And that's where Kronos and all of them kind of come in, right? And that would be Saturn, right? Father Time, the one who controls. That would be the god of this world, okay? And then you have his sons, which would then be the other planets, right? The 7 main planets, right? And these are the Olympians. These are the ones who came down on Mount Olympus. And if you look, every single culture has something very similar, whether it's, Mount Olympus, the Watchers in the Book of Enoch came down on Mount Hermon, Mount Sinai in the Bible with Moses, right? Over and over and over, you have them kind of like coming to this mountain, this place, right, where they touch down here on earth, and begin their mission. Enki created us. Yeah, well, and here's the thing with the Anunnaki. That's exactly what it says. His name was Ea first, which meant Lord of the Water, Lord of the Water. And it's kind of the same type of story if you think about it. He was the Lord of the Water first as Ea. Then he became Enki, which was Lord of the Earth, right? So it's kind of showing this elemental aspect, this primordial aspect of him first. And then all of a sudden, he becomes his full glory, which he was the one who loved us, right? He was the intelligent one. He was the one, that cared for humanity. It was Enlil who did not. He didn't want us to be created. He didn't want us to have this divine spark. So the Anunnaki had a slave race already known as the Agigi, right? Or the Agigi. They go on strike, they go on rebellion, and all of a sudden, Enki gets this bright idea to, create humanity. And if you think about it, when they start, and I believe it's Nin Herzog, right? They start trying to experiment with different versions of mankind, and you look at the fossil records, it kind of bears out. Think about Neanderthal and all these different versions of humans, or what they say are different, prehistoric versions of humans, right? And then finally we get Chrono-Magnus, right? And once Chrono-Magnus shows up on the scene, like, we become a social creature. We're fucking making art on cave walls. We're living in communities. We're using tools and all kinds of shit, right? We have fire. We have fire. And see, in fire, it's really key. Fire represents knowledge and enlightenment. It's very, very symbolic, right? And remember, in like the Greek, it's Prometheus. He's the light bearer, right? You look at Lucifer, all of that. They're bringing that torch, right? That knowledge, right? And that's the enlightenment. Even Moses, when he goes on Mount Sinai, what does he find up there? The burning bush, right? The burning bush. And all of these archonic beings that, are described as having smokeless fire, right? These seraph or seraphic beings, seraphim, right? Because we know there are different types of entities, and the Bible even bears this out, right? With cherubim, ophanum, or whatever they're called, right? These different versions of entities. And like I said, if we look at every single culture, they have different versions of entities, right? From the Olympians, the Titans, the Anunnaki, the Ajiji, right? So on and so forth. The Elohim, seraphim, cherubim, they all have these different levels of entities. So this could either be us in previous cycles, right? And in previous cycles and in previous incarnations, before we were captured, mentally, spiritually, in the way that we are now, and locked into this version of the human body, that could have been us, unbridled, unlimited. We could have been those gods, but something kind of tells me that I don't think it was, actually. And the reason being is because, we tell the accounts of the arrival of them. If you think about like the Zulu, and man, I got it on the tip of my tongue what they called the gods. They had a crazy name for them. It starts with a C. Something, Charita, or some shit like that, right? So when the gods arrive with the Zulu, and they're telling you, so that means we were already here, right? Whenever a lot of these gods arrived, right? So when they arrive, what they do is they bring the moon, they bring the moon with them, and so many people have thought about that the moon is artificial, it's artificial. And there's been things that have happened to the moons where it's been struck and rung like a fucking bell. This is a pretty famous thing. A lot of people have heard this story, right? How the moon rung like a bell, meaning it's probably hollow or made of metal or, something like that. Even when we look at the moon, the moon being, just the exact size and precise location for perfect eclipse, right, of our sun, like you can't make that shit up, right? You can't make that shit up. It's like somebody said it, in the exact perfect spot, as if it was placed there for the exact perfect size that it is, in order to allow for eclipses every so often, right? Throughout these cycles. Okay, so there's one thing. Another thing is they say that the moon is too big to be a satellite of the Earth, right? The mass doesn't account for, the Earth as well, so it couldn't have come out of the Earth in some type of collision or catastrophe, right? Some type of impact, right? So that doesn't bear out, And then we have it in a tidal lock as well, right? So the thing's literally facing us one side only all the time, right? All the time. So go figure, right? There's a lot to say that the moon could possibly, not be what we think it is. And there was a scientist back in the 50s that talked about how the moon, was plasma. He's like, there's no way that anybody could walk on the moon because it's plasma, which, if you think about how, 90 something percent of the universe is actually plasma, it starts to make a lot of sense that possibly the moon is that way too. But, and then you have all these different people that make these claims and accounts that on the dark side of the moon is where the extraterrestrials are operating. And now we're about to go into Weirdsville here, So, and I want to state this for YouTube first. I'm not a doctor. This is not fucking medical advice. I'm not a lawyer, legal advice. This is not financial advice, right? This is not the news. Do not take this as fact or, anything like that. This is my fucking opinion. And I'm crazy. I have schizophrenia. I'm stupid. And I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. It's just my opinion, right? So don't freak out of anything you hear. So that's for YouTube. That's my disclaimer, guys. So we see, people talk about how the moon is a base, right? It's a base for extraterrestrials. And it makes a lot of sense. If anybody's ever heard of David Icke and the concept of the Saturn moon matrix, right? So, in this particular concept, right, the moon acts as like a parabolic dish, right? It is essentially like an antenna that is picking up on the frequency of Saturn, right? Amplifying that frequency of Saturn down to the Earth to kind of keep us, in this lower state of consciousness, right? It's like this oppressing vibration, right? It's what makes us have nightmares and all kinds of shit, right? And keep in mind, one of the names for the moon is Leaven, right? Leaven means sin, right? Like you heard the Bible say about unleavened bread and shit like that, right? So the moon being leaven, it just kind of, it really starts to make you think. And then when you look at, the Kabbalah and the Sephiroth and all of this, right? And where that's located, right? Within magic and shit, and how the moon is so heavily used within magic, we know that there is a darker nature to this. It is supposed to rule the shadow aspect of humanity. It is, in essence, the light of the underworld, And some people even believe that it acts as kind of like a filter for the sun's pure awareness, or it acts like a kind of like a holder for the energy of, the 7 main planets, right? And that they're filtered through that, okay? And this also represents like our lower carnal nature, our shadow side as well, And if you think about the moon and all the different associations with Luna and Pan and Nox and all of this, it's always in association with darkness, right? So when we look at this concept of the Saturn moon matrix, right? Well, Saturn, essentially, this being Kronos, Satan, Hasatan, right? The dragon, he is the father, God of this world, the controlling energy, the dominant masculine energy of this solar system. And if you think about solar system as a soul system, right? Meaning you are in some sort of soul factory, right? This is like some sort of, and this is what's fucked up about it. If we really start to think about this, and when I really started, and before I dive really deep, before I really started to learn some things, and I started to come to some of these conclusions and, theorizing on some of these things, it really chapped my ass, man. I'm not going to lie. It fucked me up. It made me feel like it was hopeless and like there was no point at one time, It's like if we're totally enslaved, and if these entities that we call angels and demons and, extraterrestrials or whatnot are playing both good cop and bad cop, meaning they're pretending to be the good guy and they're pretending to be the bad guy, and they're all on the same team. And the object of the game, is to steal our energy and to steal our life force, right? So if we're praying to God, we're praying to Jesus, we're praying to good spirits, we're praying for good things, we're giving our energy to the positive side, right? Because we are externalizing our energy, right? We're going outside of ourselves and trying to manifest from something else, okay? And if you think about all the concepts too of religion, right? And I'm not picking on any particular religion at all, but I mean, just think about it, like what they ask you to do in Christianity when you're getting saved, it's, give yourself over to Christ, right? Give your life to Christ, give your life to Jesus. It's like you're giving your energy, you're giving yourself, you're giving your person over to an entity, right? Outside of yourself. And you're giving them dominion and you're giving them control and power over you. And think about it, it has to be invited in, right? You have to give it permission. It's like, if, to me, my whole thought is, if, these gods and shit like that are so powerful, right? Then they wouldn't even need our permission to do anything, right? Unless we're in some sort of situation that, it all is based on free will, right? So we have to agree to everything, we have to agree to everything. And that's kind of what I think has happened here. That's why it's so big with, the predictive programming and the symbolism and all of this within our society and in our world, right? And all of the different spells and delusions that everybody seems to be under. It's this constant affirmation of, yes, I agree to what they're doing to me, and, participating, in all of these things, which are ultimately, leading you to your demise. We're all being led to the slaughter bit by bit throughout our lifetime, And if you think about humanity as a whole, the massive transformation that we've seen just within the last 100 years, and the invention or the arrival of the combustion engine, and it's not exactly a step in the right direction if you ask me. The Industrial Revolution, and then all of a sudden, we had the world wars and, the atom bomb and hydrogen bomb, and it's like everything changed. Everything changed. It's like, was that the point? Was that the point when we lost control of our world? Was that the point when we were hijacked and taken over and taken captive? You think about like Roswell and shit like that, right? And they say that that's when these extraterrestrials crashed here, and we found bodies and reverse engineered technology and all of these different things. Then you even hear about, Eisenhower having some sort of covenant, with these extraterrestrials, that he met them. And the agreement was with the United States government. And I'm not telling you this is fact. I'm just telling you the story and what is said. That the United States government had an agreement, with these ETs. And the deal basically was that they would give us exclusively, technology, and we would use that technology, for war, for the enslavement of our people, all of it, right? And in exchange for this technology, exclusively to us to rule the world with, we would allow them to abduct, a limited amount of people, right? And this is where it kind of gets crazy, because it's like a limited amount of people. First off, if their technology is so fucking badass that you can't stop them from coming or going, you can't even, most of, especially then, your radars couldn't detect them. None of your weapons work against them, right? Anything. You have not a snowball's chance in hell of, stopping them from doing a fucking thing, right? But obviously, like I said, this all has something to do with free will, right? So they need us to agree. And if they are, kind of like a side note, if they are in fact like the watchers from the book of Enoch, the fallen angels, you know, then they're trying to get us to do it to ourselves, right? Because you got to think that's the whole MO of their asses, right? Is to prove that humanity, isn't deserving of taking the spot of the angelic beings, right? Of the heavenly host. They're trying to prove that we don't belong in heaven. We don't belong in the stars. We don't deserve to ascend, right? To change, to grow, to evolve as a species. That's their whole thing. They're jealous and envious of us. That's why they created hybrids. God damn, it's loud. Hybrid species. And the hybrid species were created by reproducing with us, right? And that's where you hear, coming unto the daughters of men, right? And that's where the Nephilim come in, the giants, And that was to supplant us, right? These giants were to take over the earth and kind of like be their proxy instead of us being the proxy of God, right? They wanted those giants to take our place. And matter of fact, they were, right? They were, if you believe any of the ancient mythologies and all of that, they were kicking our fucking ass when they were on the earth, right? So much so that they were devouring everything, right? They were devouring everything on the earth to the point when they stopped, when they ran out of shit, they started to devour us too. And then each other, that's pretty wild, pretty wild, and they were literally just raping the entire earth, and so that's why the deluge came, the flood came, allegedly, right? And it was to wipe their asses off the face of the earth because they didn't belong here in the first place, right? And if you remember in the book of Enoch, the way they got them to destroy one another, and this shows you the nature of these type of entities and beings, the way they got them to destroy each other, was to go to war with one another. So, and it really makes me feel, because we have this double helix, right? The two serpents on the staff, right? The double helix DNA, it makes me feel like, because we are two different beings in one, right? We're good and we're evil, that's where that side of us comes from, right? That thirst for war, that greed, that lust, that envy, jealousy, all of that shit. That's where that comes from, right? It's from the serpent side of us. You got to remember that, in the garden or whatnot, right? The serpent actually, got with Eve, right? And tricked us into eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And there was even children that came of those unions, right? And the mark of Cain, which later became like the Canaanites, right? Located on the prime meridian. They were in the Cydonia area, which, isn't it wild that Mars on its prime meridian in the Cydonia area has absolute identical structures, right? Pyramids and stuff, the same thing as like the circle and shit in England, and if you think about Great Britain, it was like Britannia or something like that. It was a goddess. This is where all that divine feminine and dog worship comes from. They were worshiping the star Sirius, right? And see, all of these different entities and these gods, they have dual aspects, both male and female aspects, right? Every god has both, right? Because they don't have a sex. They're hermaphrodites, right? Hermaphrodites, androgynous, And another thing, it's called in the Greek, it's called metaschizmoia. Metaschizmoia is, when you're told that, Lucifer or Satan will come to you as an angel of light. It's because they are metaschizomoia, meaning they are shapeshifters, right? So these entities are shapeshifters. So they're able to change their shape and their likeness. So if you wonder why it seems like it's the same fucking God with different names all over the world, it's probably because it is, right? You just change shape, change his name, right? It could be the same guy the entire time, you know? And whenever people are having these fucking encounters, you know, with what they call to be extraterrestrials and shit, that really changes the game. You know, when you start to think of like the whole metaschizomoia thing, it's like, were you for real encountering, you know, ETs, Greys, or whatever you thought you seen? You know, because these things have the ability to, you know, come to you however they want. Matter of fact, they come to you how you want to see them. You know, so if you're expecting, you know, a gray alien, then that's probably the form they're going to project to you. You know, if you're expecting some fucking winged angel that's beautiful, that's probably the form they're going to project to you. You know, and if you think about it, we've been hindered so much, you know, as a species, where we, you know, we don't use but 10% of our brain. So we have some sort of governor on our minds that don't allow us to use the full capacity of ourselves. We are at odds with ourselves all the time, right? With the left and the right brain and all of that. We're split in two, you know. We have very, very limited sight. We see 0.00013% of the electromagnetic light spectrum. We can't see anything past ultraviolet or infrared. You know, the frequencies that we hear are, you know, far less than fucking even dogs, you know. So we can't hear extremely high or low frequency. You know, it's like we're oblivious to everything, blind to everything. And then we wonder why 97% of the universe is still undiscovered. You know, it's because we can't discover it. You know, we're sitting inside a fucking fish tank here called Earth. You know, thinking that we're in the big game of the universe, not even knowing if what we're seeing outside of our window, so to speak, of the firmament, the dome, right? Not even knowing if what we're seeing outside of Earth is even real. Right? Or it's just a projection. You know, think about being in a fish tank, dude. I mean, literally, think about a fish tank, you know? Like you got like the little paper and shit for the background, you know? Or say you got like an iguana or something in a terrarium, a tank, you know? You put like fake fucking logs and shit like that, you know, fake grass, and you got a fake background and a fake light to present, you know, like it's the sun and heat, you know? What makes you think for even a fucking split second that we're not in a similar situation? You know, honestly, what makes you think? Look how local our sun appears to be. I mean, honestly, they say it's hundreds of millions and shit, you know, of miles away, but does it really appear to be that? And if so, then why can we see it with fucking, you know, cameras and phones and shit like that, and zoom in on it, you know, with like low powered telescopes and all this stuff? It's that fucking far away, hundreds of millions of miles away, but yet we can still see the bitch with the technology we have. Pretty strange. It doesn't appear to be as far as what they say, you know. And looking at the moon, like I said, the whole tidal lock thing, right? How it's tidal locked. There's a dark side that we don't see anything about. How it rang like a bell. How it's the exact perfect size and in perfect location, right, for eclipses, right, as if it was placed there, you know. And then you have the Zulu, to kind of come back to that, the Zulu tribe that said these lizard beings actually placed the moon there when they arrived here on planet Earth. And when they did, it brought cataclysms and destruction, right? It basically caused fucking tidal waves and all kinds of shit. You know, destroyed everything on Earth. It wiped out all life, you know? So they hid in the reeds, which is, you know, big. Every almost every mythology talks about the reeds and shit like that. Like when Enki speaks to the reed wall. So they hid in the reeds, and these entities come to them and they say, "Hey, we're the gods. We're the gods now. Bow down and worship. Bow down and worship. We're your lords." So the Zulu are like, "No, don't think so. You're not God, and we're not going to do no such thing." Right? So they threaten them and, like make them sick and, do all these different things to them to try to scare them, and nothing works. They just refuse to, bow down and worship. They're not going to do it. So eventually they come back to them and they say, "Look," they say, "if you don't bow down and worship it and acknowledge us as the gods, we're going to take the moon back. We're going to remove the moon, and then all the destruction on the earth is going to come again, right? And none of you will live through it." So they literally threatened to end the world, if they didn't worship. And eventually that was enough, right? They decided, that they would, because they didn't want the moon to be dragged out of place and cause the chaos that it caused before. I guess it was so bad and so fucking intense, right? So destructive, that they couldn't bear to see it happen again. And you can imagine that, if you were around and actually seen like the end of a cycle, and you seen fucking tidal waves and, earthquakes and pole shifts and just every fucking, plant and animal and, human being die. Imagine the psychological impact that would have on you. You would be scarred. You would be scarred. So it's like, you can't really blame the Zulu or whatever for not wanting to go through that again. Or I can't, at least. I don't know about you. But I think I would want to avoid that as well. So we've been physically altered. We know that the planet has been altered as well. We're sitting in some sort of, fish tank, it appears, right? Think about Operation Fishbowl, where we're literally launching nukes, trying to blow our shit out of the firmament, right? Trying to literally hit the sky with nukes to blow a hole in that damn thing. And that's real. That's real shit. White papers documented Operation Fishbowl. We were literally shooting nuclear warheads at the fucking firmament, right? Trying to escape this place. Think about the Tower of Babel. And this kind of puts like a new spin on things too, if you look at it from us kind of being these prisoners here. Think about the Tower of Babel, and humanity creating this tower, this, technology or whatever the fuck it actually was. And we used it to try to get to the heavens, right? And they said it was to overthrow God, right? And I guess in a sense it would be overthrowing God, would it not? If you finally got out from under the thumb of these reptilian fucking shitbags, right? If you finally got out from under the control of these evil extraterrestrials, then you would essentially have successfully overthrown them, right? So creating, this Tower of Babel to be able to ascend all the way to the heavens, and escape this place probably wasn't nearly as evil as what we've been taught, If we're truly enslaved and, if you look at like Old Testament God and shit like that, and I'm not saying, what you should believe or anything like that. I'm just giving you different hypothetical things and shit like that to think about and consider. If you look at the wrathful, vengeful God, right? And we even get the name God from Gadriel, right? Which was one of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. He was a fallen angel, just saying, right? Gadriel, God. That's where that comes from, And think about what they did, too, those Watchers as well. They taught us witchcraft. They taught us war, right? Lust, all of it, right? Everything that we shouldn't have been fucking with, there was like, here, you can have this. We'll teach you all about it, right? And it was to pervert our thinking. It was to pervert our souls, our spirits. You know, the way that we were natural. We were innocent. We were beautiful. And they gave us this knowledge to try to destroy us with it. The same thing happens today, guys. You know? You look at all of these different accounts, you know, of elites in their rituals where they're trying to, you know, converse with, you know, entities, right? Dark entities from the other side, or Satan. You know, there's different rituals. There's one ritual where they put a person in a bathtub, you know, and this is a crazy one, you know, and don't ask me how I know all these, you know, Luciferian cult things, right? But one of the rituals is they put a person in a bathtub, they pack it full of ice, right? And they have them underneath the ice until they stop breathing, right? Until they stop breathing. And they have a pastor or a priest, it's a satanic priest, which I don't know if you guys are aware, but a lot of times, and I don't know if it's per se a requirement. Some people say it is. I don't think it is, actually, because I've met, you know, satanic priests and practitioners that, you know, didn't used to be Catholic priest, but for some sects and cults and shit like that, they are required to become a Catholic priest first, right? I guess it depends on, you know, which cult they belong to and, you know, the order of operations that they use, right? But they have the satanic priest there, and they fill a bathtub full of ice, and they pack the person, the initiate, you know, into the ice, you know. And you keep in mind that, you know, all of the people that belong to these cults, they are alleged to be descendants of the fallen, right? And to have the bloodlines within them, right? And the bloodline, in essence, is a parasite, is what it is, right? It's a parasite. And that's what allows them to be able to, you know, feast on blood, right? Have that vampire essence to them. And I got to be careful what I talk about because I don't want to get a strike and shit like that. But, you know, any one of us, we started fucking, you know, trying to drink that shit, you know, we would be sicker than a dog. You know, we'd be throwing our biscuits up. It would be bad fucking news bears for us, right? If we tried to do that and ingest that, you know. But these people, and I want you to think about how many different celebrities and historical figures that you've seen, and they look identical, right? A celebrity that looks identical to, you know, a historical figure from 100 fucking years ago, right? Think about that. Or how a lot of these celebrities stay so fucking young, you know, so young. And you're going to say plastic surgery. Yeah, I'm talking about beyond that, right? Okay. You know, and then look at, you know, the eyes of these billionaires and shit. You know, you can see the pure evil in them, you know. It's said when they ingest this, right? And this is like ambrosia. This is the nectar of the gods. That's why the Bible talks so much about not drinking blood, right? Because it changes you, right? At a metabolic level, right? Your body starts to try to metabolize, and I believe it's Kuru, right? So you can get like Kuru, and think about, you know, people say that Hillary Clinton has that shit, you know, where you got like weird convulsions. Right? You get weird convulsions from drinking it and ingesting it, as well as your legs will stop working and all types of shit, right? You start laughing, uncontrollable, hysterical laughing. Right? And then a lot of people say that she's got the Kuru because of the things that she practices. And I'll be honest, she shows some weird fucking, you know, symptoms that are very similar to that shit, right? But that's a parasite that, people get if they do that, right? But the people that allegedly have the bloodline are able to metabolize it differently, and what it does is it reverses the aging process. Right? It reverses the aging process. And I want you to think about all these different gods and shit too. Think about the Anunnaki, right? They were drinking ambrosia, right? Drinking ambrosia, and it was so they could be immortal, right? They would stay immortal with the ambrosia. They'd stay young, and they wouldn't allow humans to drink the ambrosia either, which is crazy, right? Why weren't they allowed to have it? Because they'd live forever if they drank it. Some celebrities look very strange now. Well, yes. And think about it. I believe it's not all from plastic surgery. I believe it's from ingesting that shit, right? That it changes you, at a molecular level, And that's why they breed. They breed the way that they do. Think about all the different kings and queens and emperors and rulers throughout time and how they would, marry their brothers or sisters or their cousins and stuff like that, right? They had this inbreeding and incest and all this taking place. And the reason is because they were trying to keep their bloodline pure, right? They were trying to keep their bloodline pure. That seed of the serpent within them, right? So you got to understand that, the people that belong to these cults, and not all of them, some of them are essentially adopted into these cults, right? Let's say, hypothetically, that, I'm a Luciferian and I belong to a cult, right? And I'm a high priest, and I want to bring you in, but you don't have, the bloodline, right, in order to be in. Well, then, in that type of situation, right, they perform a ritual where you would drink mind fluids, right, because that has that parasite within it, and it's like you taking that into you. You taking that parasite into your body, and now it's combined with you as well, So they find these people, and have these people that have this within them, this seed of the serpent, right? This parasite living within them, and they have these rituals where they pack them in ice, pack them in a bathtub full of ice, and it lowers their fucking heart rate, man. I mean, drastically, to the point, I don't know if it's a hypothermia or what the hell is actually taking place. I'm not a medical doctor to really understand the entirety of the process. But, if you think about like cryogenically being frozen or hibernation, right, that's essentially what's going on, right? They're forcing you into this hibernation state, right? It's like freezing all of your body. You have oxygen still flowing through your blood and shit like that, but you're being preserved. And then it slows down your heart until it stops. And once it does, and you go to the other side, they have the satanic priest standing over top of you, right? And then the satanic priest, he sends you to hell, right? He sends you down to hell. He commands your soul down to hell, and when you go down there, because you are part of this brotherhood, right? You're part of this cult, and you have this bloodline within you. You then speak to, Satan or his minions, right? And it's dependent on how high ranking, you are, or your family is, or whatever, which will depend on what entity you get when you go, right? But see, the trick is to get you on the other side, that way you can ask questions, right? And get information and shit like that, right? Then they revive you, right? They revive you and they bring you back. And you share with everybody what you had learned, right? What you were told. They'll, whether it was, them, telling you how to, create some fucking crazy piece of technology, or giving you some prophecy about the future, or, whatever, right? They're going to share that information, and then we've even heard of, other elites as well, and if you think about, DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, DMT, LSD, different mind-altering substances, peyote, like using these in order to access alternate realities and dimensions as well, right? So with the DMT, it's basically they smoke so much DMT, and if you guys have ever heard this, right, the machine elves, right, which they are the clockwork elves is what they are, right? They're like they're demons is what they are, And for whatever reason, DMT unlocks certain parts of, our consciousness and the mind to allow us to interface with these interdimensional entities, right? And we can get information from them as well. They do rituals and all of this to where they can actually, connect with these clockwork elves. Well, after they start smoking DMT and doing this so much, they're not able to actually connect with them anymore. It doesn't work like it used to. It's lost its effectiveness, right? It's lost its potency. They've done it too much. So what they do is they literally stop these fucking people's hearts, right? Stop their hearts and pump oxygen in their blood. That way they don't, pass away. That way they can stay under for fucking 5 minutes or more at a time, right? In the death state. Because your brain, when you're born and when you die, produces DMT. Now fucking imagine that, Who's the asshead that's gonna fucking, volunteer for that? Like, yeah, I'm gonna let you guys put me under, and stop my heart for 5 minutes so I can come back with some amazing scientific discovery from the clockwork elves. Same thing with like the packing the ice in the bathtub. I'm going to let you guys, put me in ice until it literally slows my heart down to a stop. Cast my soul into Sheol, into the underworld, and then bring you back information from these rituals, right? And there's people all the time that are fucking lost, to these things. Like they don't make it. They're not able to revive them, right? And if you got to think about all of it, all of these different cults and shit like that, that's what they surround themselves about. It's like, it's all about death and rebirth, right? They're being reborn into the world, into the, the knowledge they have now, reborn as, a son of the serpent, right? As one of the dragons, they're reborn with that occult knowledge, that esoteric knowledge. And if they don't make it, then they just become a sacrifice. That's all that really is, an offering. And it's really crazy. It's really crazy. What really will boggle your mind is when you look at like the Sumerian texts and shit, you think, well, this is just all nonsense. Why would humans, of all things, why would we think that these aliens, these extraterrestrials, these interdimensional entities would want us to do this shit, right? Why would we think that they would even want us to do these things? Well, if you look at, the Anunnaki, right, and whether you're looking at the Atrahasis, Enki's World Order, which is the lost book of Enki, Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Any of these texts, right, that surround, the Anunnaki. What you will find is when they actually created humanity and among many other things, right? And, in the Atrahasis, they do ritual after ritual, right? And they teach humanity these different rituals as well, which I'll tell you about in just a second. Right? But when they create humanity, what they do is they sacrifice one of the gods, right? That's what they do. They sacrifice Kingu, right? Kingu, which was the lover of Tiamat, right? It was the lover of Tiamat. They sacrificed Kingu, and they literally go through the process. And this is what's crazy. It's like, I don't know it word for word, but it basically goes a little something like, when they sacrifice him, right, with a blade and spill the god's blood, right? And when his spirit comes back, they know that the process is complete. They literally walk through this shit, right? They know the process is complete, and they won't banish the spirit, right? They don't banish the spirit. They actually like just trap it, is what they do after it happens, and it's allegedly the spirit of that God that goes into animating us, right? When they're doing their genetic alterations. You got to think, like, when Enki and then Herzog and all of that, right? They're doing these, trial runs with pregnancies, to create man or genetically alter man. He tells her, he's like, you could have a fucking monster in your belly, right? Like he has 7 different women or whatever, right? And they all have different babies, right? And they keep trying and trying and trying to create man, and failing and failing and failing, right? Like we come out and we're hairy and we can't talk and all of this. So what he eventually does, after he gets us as close as he can get, right? Like the hairy barbarian version. If you think about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, remember how Thoth, he says, when they, the Atlantean priest king, that when he lands, right, in his ship, with his display of magic science, right, he lands in the land of the hairy barbarians, right? And this kind of makes you think of Neanderthal, right? Neanderthal with the flat teeth, being a herbivore, right? Being extremely hairy, not having speech and all of that, because that's like, even what they say in these texts is like, we couldn't talk, we were hairy, we were all these things, right? It wasn't until we were crossbred, with them, then all of a sudden we developed canines, right? And this, I was even saying, earlier about the Sirius and the Dog Star, right? And the Canaanites, right? And the canines, and remember, the gods, they devour, us, right? They eat us, they eat essence. So those canines, their fangs is what they are, And you got to think too, like in the garden, right? The punishment for deceiving mankind was that the serpent would crawl on its belly, and devour and eat the dust of the earth, right? Well, mankind was made out of, the dirt, right? So they're eating us. That's what they're doing, right? The serpent has to eat us, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, as a whole. And I've said this before, when the Anunnaki were creating the slave race to mine gold, and you got to think, like the Ajiji or whatever, they were saying that the burden was too much. They were ready to go to war with the Anunnaki over being enslaved, like what they had them doing. So this really tells you something right there. Like, how fucking horrific was it that this other species of extraterrestrial that was created by them was like, they popped up at Enlil's door and they're like, hell to the no. We're going to war if you don't let us be free, right? The burden is too much. We can't bear it, right? We can't bear it. And then that's why they decided to create humanity, as a slave race. Well, think about what the actual burden was, to mine gold. And I've talked about this before. Gold means spirit, right? It's your spiritual essence. It's your soul. So they were mining soul force. They were mining soul energy. That's what they were doing. Which, really lets you know, like, why these other entities wanted nothing to do with it. Okay, hold on. Amun Ra says Elon has built a super AI facility in Memphis, Tennessee. He said, God will come from Memphis in an interview not long ago. I have never heard that Elon Musk said that God will come from Memphis. But, I have heard of, the United States of America perhaps being, the land of the Phoenicians or part of the ancient Egyptians, looking at the Grand Canyon and all of that. Missouri, there's different glyphs and all kinds of shit around here. So I have heard that before, But if you think about it, the burden was so bad that, the Ajiji were ready to rebel and go to war over this, and they created us. And it's like, as they're doing these genetic alterations with us, failing time after time. And like I said, this is kind of like really makes sense when you look at like the fossil records and why there are so many different versions of mankind, according to the fossil records. Whether that's real or not, I don't know, right? But this is what science and academia says. Right? And then finally, they got the closest they could get, and we were the hairy barbarian that couldn't talk. So what he decides to do, Enki decides to do, is he pulls up his spaceship and he finds, and this is his words, not mine, he finds 2 young, tender-breasted females. Finds 2 young, tender-breasted females, and he bangs them both. Bangs them both, and they both get pregnant. And one has Adamu, and the other has Titi, right? And this is Adam and Eve. This is Adam and Eve. And this is where we get, Chrono-Magnus in this modern day human. This is when he teaches them how to farm and start civilization and all this shit, right? And what's crazy is, once we had this consciousness within us, things started to drastically change for humanity, okay? For one, and I've said this in the past, that the Anunnaki are a hive mind, right? These extraterrestrials are hive mind. They're telepathic, so they share sentience among one another. They can read each other's thoughts, they can communicate, through mind, and they don't have, the way I understand it is, they don't have like all of the intrusive thoughts and shit like that like we do, right? So once they have put their essence into us, we also became connected to that God consciousness as well, right? And the reason that they were so upset with our noise translates into consciousness, right? So it wasn't that they were mad, and people say this all the time, like, oh, they didn't want to hear us having sex and shit like that. It's not true. That's not what it was about at all, right? Not what it was about at all. They could hear us thinking, right? They could hear our thoughts. They could hear our thoughts. We were too loud. That's why we were too loud. You got to think, we have intrusive thoughts. We're not like them in some constant meditative state, right? And they wanted to get us out of there. They wanted to, to shut that down. They're like, fuck, we made a mistake. They fragmented us, we're dualistic. We have 2 different sides of ourselves, right? That are opposing sides. So you have like every bit of history that talks about these different gods, right? From India to, Sumeria, right? All across the globe that talks about these different gods and their role within creation and their genetic alteration and, all of these things, And then you look at our world today. And you can't tell me, and I don't care fucking who you are, you can't tell me that the things you're seeing taking place don't appear to be an anti-human agenda. You know, why in the fuck? You know, and it makes no sense if you think about it. Why in the fuck, you know, would we poison our own air? Why in the hell would we poison our own water, our own food? Why would we put out toxic frequency that's literally destroying our DNA with 5G and shit like that? Why would we do that? It makes no fucking sense whatsoever, right? Why would we disseminate different, treatments that literally destroy the pineal gland, our spiritual antenna within our bodies? Right? Why would we do these things? You know, you start to look at everything that's taken place here on Earth, especially, like I said, within the last 100 years and, you know, the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of the combustion engine. It's like it really starts to make sense. You know, something else has had a hand in this, you know? And what we perceive to be, you know, gifts from the gods, you know, this technology and shit, you know, is no gift at all. Right? It's a deal with the devil is what it is. And if you think about any deal you have with the devil, right? Any deal with the devil, you never get what you ask for. You know? Whenever you sell your soul, you may sell your soul for riches and fame, but you know, the moment you hit fucking, you know, the pinnacle of your career is the moment, you know, you're sacrificed, right? The moment it's all taken away. Or, you know, it's got some fine print within the deal to where you don't get famous till after you pass away, right? Then you're rich, then you're famous, right? Like, oh, you said you wanted to find the love of your life, right? That deal with the devil, right? You found them, but you don't get to be with them, right? That's the type of shit that, you know, these bargains are made of, right? They're to fuck you over, you know, straight up. I've never seen a person that has participated in stuff like that have it ever work out in a good way. And I mean that, you know, I mean that. It's a backdoor deal, right? To where you may get some of what you desire. It may seem like what you want, you know, but you're being robbed. You're being robbed of your essence. You're being robbed of your life, right? And ultimately, it will always end in your downfall, your demise, and your destruction every single time, you know. And even if you get to live it out and like enjoy all the wealth and riches, it takes away who you are, right? So you have psychological problems, emotional issues, right? You're extremely fucking unhappy, right? You're haunted. You know, you're haunted by demons, in essence. You know, you're haunted by demons and unable to actually enjoy, you know, the benefits of any of these things that, you know, you bargained for. And it's like humanity, you know, they've made the bargain. You know, like I said, with the whole, you know, President Eisenhower, and it was said that he made a pact with these entities, right? These aliens, these extraterrestrials. And to me, aliens are synonymous with fallen angels, you know? That's the way I see it. You know, it's the way I see it. And when I see people who do all this channeling shit and talk about Pleiadians and all of this, it's like, it's funny to me, actually. It's hilarious. It's like, when you read the Bible, you know, and many other texts and books and stuff as well, you know, not just, you know, the Bible, but many spiritual texts and books, you know, it refers to Orion. It refers to the Pleiades. It refers to Sirius. It refers to these star systems, for one, and it tells you not to worship them, and it tells you that it's bad news, the people that come from there. And it's like, still yet, People want to talk about being star seeds and shit like that because it's trendy and it's cool, right? It's become trendy because you're all being indoctrinated. This is mass indoctrination, right? They're indoctrinating us into the whole new age, new thought shit because they want us to be deceived, right? They want us to fall for this strong delusion, this great deception, They got to convince us all, you're all star seeds, right? You're all extraterrestrials. You all come from aliens. Those are the gods, right? Those are the gods. That's who you came from. They're your ancestors. That way when it's all, the curtain is pulled back, you're just going to accept it blindly. You're going to go along with whatever it is, right? Like how many different people, talk about, oh, there'll be a fake alien invasion, followed by a real one, or a real one followed by, like, how many different scenarios have you heard about alien invasions and shit like that, right? Like, oh, the first ones are going to come and what they're going to do. And, these are Christians and shit that talk like this, by the way. They talk about this great deception and shit like that. And that, the angels are going to come, and as an invading force. We're going to mistaken them as an invading force. We're going to mistaken God as an invading force, right? Or, the fallen angels are going to come and they're going to claim to be God. They're going to claim to be our creators, right? And they're going to deceive all of us, I'm sorry, but I have a hard time swallowing that pill and a hard time believing it because I believe they're already fucking here and they've always been here. You look at all of these different texts and mythologies and it's like they were forced to go underground. They were forced to go underground. They weren't allowed to stay up on the surface anymore. Whether that's because they were changed or altered or what, but something happened that forced them, to leave the surface of the earth. And the offspring that they tried to create, the Nephilim, was destroyed. It was killed. It was wiped out. Because they were trying to use that to supplant us, right? To take our place, to take our birthright from us. When I watch planes go across the sky, dropping these metals on top of us day in and day out, right? Knowing that we're ingesting all of this stuff, right? It's in our food, our water, our air, And it has these destructive properties that destroy the frontal lobe of the brain, giving us Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, juvenile diabetes, all these different things, ADHD, fucking autism. And not only does it have a destructive property to our brains, but it's destructive to our pineal gland, right? Our spiritual antenna, it's being destroyed. That way we can't tune in, to higher consciousness. We're not able to do it because it's been tampered with. But yet, all of the 5G towers, are honed in, on the whole IEEE thing, right? They're honed in to the frequency of the human body. The frequency of the human body, and they're using this smart dust to amplify the signal. And we're working in congruency with the repeaters that are on all of these fucking 5G towers. Right? The signal isn't strong enough to be able to, spread itself far and wide, right? So they use us to help amplify those repeaters. And isn't it crazy too? It's like, it's always like the micro and the macro. You look at like the soul system, the soul trap, right? The Saturn moon matrix, right? It's said that Saturn, the Lord of the Rings, Kronos, Father Time, and start thinking about all of this too, because like the anatomical number of man, right? 6 atoms, 6 protons, 6, all of that, right? 666, right? The number of the beast, 666, right? Chronos, or Satan, being Father Time, right? And if we look at time, right, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 24 hours, 2 plus 4 is 6, right? 666. It is this frequency, right? And on the North Pole of Saturn, on the North Pole, Jesus, that's not like shit. On the North Pole of Saturn, there is a hexagon, right? That hexagon is the cube, and this is where that black cube worship comes in, right? And you look at every fucking religion across the world, and they all have this cube incorporated, right? Whether this is in Mecca, you know, where they go around the fucking cube in Mecca, right? The big giant black and gold cube, just like the rings of Saturn, right? Or the Jews where they have the cube on their fucking forehead and all of this, right? Very funny how they all have this cube incorporated, right? And in astrology, Jesus, sorry guys. In astrology, you know, Saturn acts as the restrictor, right? He's the controller, you know? He keeps everything in bounds, you know, and doesn't allow anything to, you know, step outside of the boundaries, right? He's the restrictor, the restrainer, the controller. That's what Saturn is. And it's said that his rings are not like what we're taught they are, you know, in school and shit like that. That they're actually crystalline rings, right? And that they are vibrating or giving off a specific frequency, right? And I've played this before, right? I wish I was at my computer. I'll probably do one at, you know, a deep dive on the computer tomorrow night. You know, that way I have all the good stuff. You know, this was kind of impromptu. But, you know, if you guys have ever heard this, right? Saturn gives off a frequency. It's got its own sound. It generates its own sound, its own frequency. I've played this sound for you guys in the past, right? And see, in this sound, this frequency that's, you know, that's emanating from this celestial body, it's emanating outwards, right? Into the solar system, you know? And then that's where the whole Saturn moon matrix concept comes into play, right? The moon acting as a parabolic dish or a satellite, right? To amplify said signal of Saturn into the earth, you know, into the earth grid. You know, that way we're constantly being, you know, oppressed by this lower, you know, distorted vibration, you know, that keeps us locked in matter. You know, that way we are unable to ascend or vibrate out of the physical state, you know? Because you got to think, if we were able to raise our frequency to such a high state, right? A high place of consciousness. And this is really be possible too, if you think about it, right? To the point to where our frequency was off the fucking charts, off the scales, right? You know, and this has happened. People have hit such high points of consciousness to where they were able to manifest, you know, things out of thin air, to where they're able to levitate, you know, just different types of amazing feats, supernatural feats. And this is because they are in a different frequency, a different dimensional space because of where they're vibrating, right? Now, think about that. You know, if we were able to do that, able to transcend, you know, all of this, it would literally transmute and transfigure everything within our body, right? The same way that we're able to speak to the cells within our body, and once we start to raise our frequency and our vibration, you know, all of our cells go into healing and, you know, start to adopt crystalline properties and things like that. Now I'll amplify that by 1,000. You know, if there was no restrictions, there was no matrix in place, right, which acts as a governor. So think about, you know, the fact that you can only access 10% of your brain, you know, is that to keep you stupid, or is that really like the governor on our frequencies, right? They only allow you to access a sliver of your brain, because if you were able to access the whole gambit, you would fucking transcend the reality probably entirely. Maybe even create your own. Who knows? We don't know what we're capable of. But I guarantee we'd be able to see into, multiple dimensional spaces, right? And it's like, and we can still do that, and people do that, right? They experience telepathy and, all types of different gifts and premonitions and, all of this, at super high states of consciousness. But isn't it crazy how they can never hold that, right? They can never hold that state of consciousness for an infinite amount of time, right? Our consciousness, that kundalini, it rises up and back down, up and back down. So we're constantly chasing the dragon, so to speak, right? Like we get to this euphoric fucking, place where we're on the clouds, we're on the mountains consciously, to where, we can literally, where reality looks different, sounds different, feels different, and we have supernatural ability. And then all of a sudden, it goes back down, as if something is constantly pushing on us, consciously, pulling, tugging. Do we call it gravity? Right? Or is that what magnetism actually does? Right? The magnetic field, right? Acts as like something to like pull us magnetically, to pull our to pull our vibration, to pull our frequency back down to a better level. Sorry guys, I don't know. Get away from that. But to pull our vibration and our frequency down to a lower level, right? Magnetism doing this, keeping us in restriction. The same thing with our sight and all of this, right? The reason that we have the restriction on our sight, our hearing, all of that, because if we raise that frequency, we would then be able to see and experience these different realities as well. I mean, really start to think about this shit. There's a reason that they call the archons the governors or the rulers of the reality. And these are the planets, right? And remember, planet means wandering star. The reason they're the rulers of the reality, it's because they are actively imposing upon the reality with their frequency, their vibration, and a state of constant, right? So it's like, we have all of the celestial spheres, which are looking down here from the lattice of the heavens, right? And every star gives off its own frequency. It does. You can, and depending on when you're born and what was in alignment in that particular night, that makes up, the algorithm of who you are. And that's how astrology works, right? Certain things were in alignment and certain energies were more prominent when you were created, And because of that, some energies are more beneficial and some are not to you, God damn it. I feel like this person's doing this shit on purpose. But so some of these different energies, are what makes you up. And think about the planets. The planets are actually, the most powerful energies that are at play within our reality, right? They rule the chakras, right? The 7 main planets rule the 7 chakras, the 7 days of the week. And remember, it was the 7 days of the week, right, for God to create things, right? That's the time of creation, as well. And it's how long it took to create the earth. Not just that, they rule the colors of the rainbow, right? The colors of the rainbow, which is the spectrum of color. When you look at like what the firmament actually is, it acts as a prism, right? As a prism, like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, you have all of these different energies from these wandering stars, right? These different frequencies, these colors that are entering into the prism, right? And us here on the other side of said prism, right? It is separated, right? It's separated. Like when you put light into a prism, you notice how it separates out into, the different colors of the rainbow. You can see, the separate bands and frequencies of light. That's what we are. Everything like comes in as one whole energy, and we have the illusion of separation on the other side. I've talked about this before, right? The whole concept of soul luminescence, right? Or star in a jar. And notice how when that's taking place, that takes place in water. And you look at all of the stars and they appear to be underwater, And even in the Bible and shit, it talks about how the waters, were separated, in the firmament above and below, So, the whole concept too of like spaceships and all of that, right? It's like it all goes into water, right? Maritime law, all of that, right? And that's why, we are treated the way we are when we're born. We fall under that whole merchant shit, right? Like what they do with ships, right? Every ship or every vessel is a female, we are a product that is born into, this world. We're a product of heaven being born into this world, right? We're at the dock, right? The doctor, right? We're pricked upon or stamped upon the sole of our feet, on our souls, right? Right? Because the earth is God's footstool, right? As well, everything is allegorical, metaphorical, and symbolic, as above, so below, right? They are claiming ownership of our essence, of our physical vessel, of our body, which is the product when we enter into, this world. And see, our vessel is carrying the product, which is the soul, right? Our soul force, our energy, right? It's like we're being born into the grocery store of the universe. That's what's crazy about it. And that's how we're treated. We're given a social security number, which is our bond. We're born into bondage, right? That's our fucking serial number. When we're scanned at the grocery, And all the governments, they borrow against our value, right? The amount of taxes that they think we will, pay in our lifetime is how the national debt is allegedly accumulated, right? So they're borrowing against your value. All the bonds and the value of our countries are created by the people, And if you look at the etymology of the word nation, right? Nation means a flight of locusts, which is interesting when you think about it, because what comes up out of the bottomless pit, right? In the book of Revelation, locusts come up out of the bottomless pit, Are we those locusts up out of the bottomless pit? And do we become those locusts, right? Which, a locust, is, an insect, What you think about these insectoid type of extraterrestrials and shit like that. I don't believe in coincidence. I feel like all of this, has some sort of connection, And like I've said before, that bottomless pit, the king over them is Abaddon, Apollyon, right? The destroyer. The mascot Shiva at CERN with the logo that's 666, right? Saturn. Once again, we have that same number, that same frequency, right there. Remember, this matrix is simulation, right? Numbers are the universal language. Math is the universal language, right? So everything operates through numbers. Numbers, stand for frequency, right? And if you put these numbers in specific orders or alignments, that creates geometry, right? The sacred geometry of reality. That's why the triangle is so big. It's like, That's how you trap energy, is a triangle, actually. It's how you trap energy. Like the first point of connection is God, and this is like, in the occult, the first point of connection is God. The second point is you, and then the third point, is spirit, or the connection back, right? So when you have something in 3 different points in a triangle, and that's why if you're ever doing like rituals and shit, and you're invoking spirits, you will take a circle, right? Circle of protection around yourself, and then you will take a circle and put a triangle inside of that circle with the black mirror, right? The black mirror allows you to, obsidian allows you to, contact dark entities, right? And that triangle, those 3 points of contact, allow that entity to be trapped. It can't move from that place, right? Because of the triangle, right? Everything is like 2 and 3 as well. It's 2 and 3. These are like the numbers of creation, the numbers of the universe, right? So when you have, the triangle, and you keep continuing to make these points, right? And if you want to put something in motion again, right, and allow it movement, allow it to move, right, then it's 5 points, right? Then it's 5 points. It's a pentagon or a pentagram, right? So if now you want to know why the pentagram is so big, it's because you are a pentagram. The pentagram or pinnacle stands for the physical, right? It's the starfish body, right? The 2 arms, 2 legs, and head, right? That is the pentagram, right? Representing, the earth, representing the physical, And, a lot of people don't understand just how important, numbers, symbols, geometry, all of this actually is to the reality itself. See, when you're watching television and shit like that, or you're doom scrolling online, and you're seeing all of this symbolism within the videos that you're watching, say, just for instance, as an example, the Illuminati symbolism and shit, right? All-seeing eyes and shit like that, which represents the eye of Providence, is what it represents. And the eye of Providence is Polaris, the North Star, right? That is the projection point within our matrix, within our simulation, our reality. I wish I was on my computer. I could show you guys how it works with the Masonic compass and square and shit, right? It show the 369 rule. Right, 3 representing the Trinity, the triune being, right? That is the internal, the esoteric, right? The spiritual essence of us. That is what the number 3 is, right? That's the triangle, like I said, right? Trapping that energy into a vessel. And then 6 represents, Midgard, right? Mid-earth, right? Middle Earth, right? It represents the physical world. And that's where we get the number, 666 and all of that, right? It represents the construct of time. It represents carbon-based beings, all of that, right? 6 represents the physical. And then 9 represents the heavens, represents the heavens. And you can even, in the battle of like Ragnarok and shit like that, I believe it's 9 that when they have the final battle, like he goes up to the 9th, or whatever, right before he comes back down, Loki and all of them, and they're having their final battle. They're telling you this. They're telling you how it all works. Everything works in these cycles. We, just like that Kundalini, like I was talking about earlier, how we can never really stay in that place of high consciousness, right? Because we hit the top, and we drop back down. There's some type of frequency, whether it be what we call gravity, which I believe is just magnetism, right? This force that's constantly pulling our frequency, our vibration back downward, right? And not allowing us to ascend outside of the reality, not just with the governor on our brain and all that, right? That's a part of it, right? And these oppressive frequencies being beamed into us constantly, right? Remember, 11, the moon, the sin, the amplification of Saturn, right? And that, that hexagon, and that's where the word hex comes from, right? Hex, right? Being hexed out, right? You're double crossed, right? So think about a triangle, two triangles, right? They have three sides, right? You're double crossed, right? You're hexed, It's the hexagon, the hexagram, represents both the higher and the lower nature. You see, like the star of Thelema, right? It's got the little 6 sides and all of that, right? Like all of this has incredible symbolism and incredible prominence when it comes to the way that reality is shaped and works, and why we're constantly being, enslaved to all these different aspects, right? Because we don't understand what's taking place. We're oblivious to it. That's why it's so important for them to keep everything secret. It's not because they think that you wouldn't be able to, understand it or shit like that, right? Like, of course, not everybody's going to be a fucking, high priest or an advanced occultist, right? That's just not in the cards for everyone, right? Not everybody, is a 33, Some of us are, some of us are not, I know a lot of people in the spiritual communities claim to be ascended masters and shit, but if you were an ascended master, you would have the life path of a 33, right? So, just saying, unless you have that, shut the fuck up about being an ascended master, then you're not. Your numerology would reflect that. You could have a master number, meaning you've ascended before, but it doesn't make you an ascended master. The master numbers are 11, 22, and 33. 11 provides influence, right? 22 is the builder, and 33 is the master teacher and healer, right? I'm actually a 33, right? And the reason 33 is significant, I was born on the 33rd parallel as well, right, where they sacrificed JFK, right, which was a king kill sacrifice. These different rituals, they always do this, certain numbers and shit like that have symbolic meaning, the 33rd parallel being one of them. Dallas, Texas, right, where they offed JFK, But, the whole thing with, the 33 energy is because if you think about it, remember, we're 80% water, the planet is 80% water, all of this. Well, guess what? Water freezes right at 32 degrees, right? So 33, water becomes free, becomes fluid again, right? It's no longer frozen, Freemasons, right? Free agents, these are just different names that are all synonymous with the same thing, so that 33 represents that, And a lot of people don't understand that. And remember, once again, we talked about the 3, in how 3, the triangle is how you trap energy, right? It's how you trap energy as well. So you have the back-to-back 3s, right? Like I said, the star of Thelema, a lot of people don't understand, that these things are how it all works, but it is, it is. And the people that are in control understand that this is how it works too, That's why it's so important for them to do the things they do. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, when you're watching television or videos or something like that, and let's just say hypothetically, like you're watching me and all of a sudden I start throwing up that type of shit, right? I'm giving you, I'm putting that frequency, right, out there, right? Now, whether or not you're aware of the hand signals that I'm using, or I have something on my shirt or something, right, an all-seeing eye, or there's a graphic within the video that's got it, and whether or not you even see it, right, or know what it is or are aware of it, it's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter, right? You don't have to be aware of shit. Your eyes are picking it up, right? See, the eyes are the windows to the soul, So even though you don't understand what you're seeing, and you might not even be aware of what you're seeing, it's still entering into your subconscious and having an effect on you. And seeing what it's doing is, you're being attracted to that frequency, right? You're being attracted to that frequency. So, the whole PDF shit, pedo shit, where they constantly bombard people with that shit, the whole pizza stuff and all of that, right? You are connecting with that frequency. You're giving energy to that frequency. You're giving power to that frequency. When you're looking at those little sigils and symbols that they have for that stuff, that's exactly what you're doing. You're giving your energy. Where attention goes, energy flows. Right? So wherever you're giving your attention to, that's what you're giving your energy to. Your focus. And that's what's reflecting back to you. Because whatever you're looking at is looking back at you also. You have to understand that as well. And it's like you are what you eat, right? So whatever you're ingesting, becomes the makeup of the composition of who you are internally. That's why it's so important for people to be aware of all these different things. It's like, understand what you're connecting to, understand what you're putting in your body, your mind, your soul, and understand what you're putting out there as well, right? For others, you have a responsibility. We all do. See, once you become aware of what's taking place, you're no longer ignorant, right? You're held accountable karmically for the things that you're doing, for the things that you're saying. You're no longer ignorant, right? Ignorance is bliss. You're no longer oblivious to anything. You now know what's taking place, And your silence is consent, by the way, as well. Right? Your silence is consent. So if you're sitting back doing nothing, watching people suffer, and you could do something to help them, to change their life, to make an impact, then you're complicit in their suffering. Whether you believe that or not, you are. Right? You are. You're allowing injustice to take place when you could do something to intervene. I know it's become incredibly trendy, online with social media, for people to act like they're woke now and spiritual and all of that, and so aware and, so conscious, but it's a fucking joke. It's a fucking joke. It's disingenuous. And what's actually happened is people are spiritualizing the ego. I hate to tell you, you're not woke, you're not ascended, you're not aware, you're not conscious. If you can sit back and watch people suffer or go without and have the ability to change their life or have the ability to help them, you just choose to not do it. That's some low vibrational shit, some low vibe shit. You are part of the problem. You are part of the problem. That's what you are. Whether you want to accept that or not. Anytime you walk past a homeless guy, and you have a fucking dollar in your pocket, right? And your first thought is, oh, they're just going to get beer or drugs with it. Da, 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 da. Like, you are part of the problem. That's why, the Bible says to not let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. And we're supposed to give and do everything from a place of being genuine. Everybody wants to do shit now on social media, right? To virtue signal when everybody's looking, right? So they look a certain way. You want to step up and fight for, different causes, right? Climate change or racism or sexism or homophobia, right? Transphobia. You want to step up and fight for those causes. Why? Because you want people to see you fighting for those fucking causes. You want to be the loudest voice, right? Have the loudest opinion because you think you're right. You think that makes you right by being the loudest in the room. It doesn't. It just makes you the fucking loudest and the most obnoxious. That's it. If you can't stand up for people when nobody's looking, then you're a fucking fraud. Or will you stand up for people when it starts to cost you? How many people will stand up for the truth or help other people when it costs them something? Not very many, guys. Not at all. If you start getting threatened for speaking the truth, or it starts affecting you financially, or, something like that, all of a sudden you don't want to do it no more, do you? And you don't want to play this game no more. It's no fun. Because and remember, Christ said, you must be willing to give up your mother, your father, your brother, right, to follow me. Right? That's in essence what he was saying. You have to be willing to lose it all. You have to be willing to lose it all, to give it all up. And see, like I said, the whole trendy fucking new age woo-woo nonsense, it's telling you something that's just not true. When it sits there and talks about like self-love and self-care and right, I got to take care of myself, right? I get so sick of hearing people use that shit. It is an excuse to be selfish and self-centered and self-absorbed. That is all it fucking is, right? I can't love nobody else if I don't love me, right? Well, if you really loved yourself, you would be able to love others. That's a fact. Being a selfish fuck doesn't mean you love yourself at all. Sorry. They don't jive, right? And acting like it's some spiritual thing to be a selfish fucking person, is not. Sorry, once again. That's nonsense. The same thing with the people that, constantly say, I don't want to lower my vibration, da 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 da. So they use it as an excuse to bury their heads in the sand. They did the same thing before they were awake, which they're not awake. They're just idiots. But they did the same thing before they claimed to be a conscious ascended being, right? They buried their fucking head in the sand, They buried their fucking head in the sand and was oblivious to the world and everything going on in it, right? The only thing, and it's like, this is the sad part, and people are still like this, right? Is most people's universe is no bigger than themselves, right? Their world is no bigger than themselves. They have their direct sphere of influence, their wife, their kids, their job, maybe some friends and family, hobbies. That's it. That is it. That is the amount of influence they have on the world. That is the difference they fucking make. And it's a shit one most of the time. Most of the time, the only reason they do anything with those people in their life is because of a sense of obligation. That's it. It's not because they truly want to, or it comes from a place of empathy or compassion. And see, all these people now, once again, another trendy word, let's all say we're empaths now. I'm sorry, do you know an empath has empathy? Right? Quit claiming to be an empath as you walk past the homeless person. You're a piece of shit. You're not an empath. You can't put yourself in another person's, shoes or position. You lack the ability to be able to relate to another's pain. You know? You can feel for somebody all you want, but if you truly felt for them, you would do something. You would try. You would care, truly care. You know, and see, and that's what was the thing about like all the COVID shit. You know, it really showed people. It shows the character of people, honestly, is what it does. You know? And it shows how, like I'm saying, what I'm saying is true, that everybody's world is only as big as themselves, right? Because how many people could care less about what was going on in the world, about people suffering, about atrocities being committed, about people starving, being homeless, about people being abused, any of these things, right? About the state of the world whatsoever. They didn't give a fuck. They didn't give a fuck even about, you know, none of the pandemic shit, right? The fact that they were locking people down and people were losing their jobs and, you know, all of this. They didn't care until when? Until it came knocking at their fucking front door. Then all of a sudden it was a problem. Then all of a sudden it was an issue. Then all of a sudden shit got real. Right? It's a goddamn shame if you really think about it. Right? When you can watch your neighbor starve, you know, you can watch your neighbor starve, you can watch your neighbor suffer, and you don't care until it's you suffering, you starving. Then it's a big deal. Then it's a problem. Everybody better pay attention then, right? And they did too. Those same asshats who didn't give a fuck less about anybody else in the world at any other time and the entirety of their selfish fucking existence, right? Because they were self-caring and self-loving, right? That nonsense, right? Then when it was them, what were they doing? They were beating their chest on social media, you know, posting all this shit. Feel sorry for me, you know, all of this stuff, right? They wanted all the sympathy. They wanted all the help then. They were outraged then. They wanted change then. See, and this is why we're so easy to be conquered. You know? It's why we're so easy to be conquered. The fucking fact, and this is a, you know, it's just a sad, sad reality, honestly. It truly is. The fact we're so fucking divided as people so easily, you know, we're so easily manipulated and seduced. Now, I'm not talking about just sexually, you know. We're just seduced as a species away from ourselves, our morals, unity, solidarity, you know. You can get people up in arms about, you know, some sort of form of racism, right? If it's the right race. If it's the right race, right? Think about that. Think about what that says about people. You know? It says that their ploy is nonsense. It's bullshit to start with. If racism is only a problem when it happens to one particular race or, you know, a couple particular races and not all races, then that's racist. You're a racist. Just undercover. You know? You're part of the problem. If suffering is okay as long as it happens to your political opponents, if bad shit's okay as long as it happens to your political opponents, you're part of the fucking problem. You know? As long as it happens to Donald Trump, right? Or Joe Biden. As long as it happens to one of them, right? It's all good. Those goddamn liberals, right? Those fucking liberals. Those Trumpers. You'll be cheering on fucking watching somebody get beat down, right? A beating at a rally or something, you know, like a sack of dog shit you are, right? Because of who they voted for. All your compassion leaves you because of who they voted for. And then we wonder why we're conquered. You know, we wonder why we're conquered. All your compassion leaves you because of what color they are. Right? All that white person had it coming. Colonialist motherfucker. Right? And we wonder why we're conquered. Yeah. Or we have our own thoughts and ideas about everything, and we want to fucking force everybody else to play along with our goddamn illusions, right? I think that I'm a different gender now, so guess what? You have to go against biology and reality too, or else that offends me. Right? And if you don't, you're a terrible human being. If you don't, you're a bigot and a homophobe and a transphobe, right? It's like if it, you know, whatever happened to people like doing what they wanted to do and being okay with other people that just wanted to do something different or believe something different, you know? What happened to realizing that it was the differences that made our world beautiful? And that ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all really very similar, but it is those differences that make us unique, you know, that make the world a special place. Yeah, okay, you were born a biological man, right? And you want to be a woman. You know, me personally, I would call you a woman if you wanted to be called a woman. It doesn't bother me, you know, out of respect for you and what you wish to be called, you know, what you identify as. That's what I would do because I want to be respectful and treat other people how I want to be treated, you know. And if I was going through that or whatever and I wanted to, you know, be that, then I would hope people would, you know, treat me with some dignity and respect as well, you know. But at the same time, you know, like if you're trying to force me to do something, that's another thing, right? That's another thing. If you think it's okay for you to go into, you know, the women's restroom, that's where it crosses the line for me, you know. I don't want you in there with my daughters. You know? Sorry, however you feel. Biologically, you have no business in there. You know, and we've gotten to the point, it's like, think about the whole 1984, right? The Orwellian dystopian society, right? And the Newspeak and all of that, right? Where they basically started, you know, creating their own words and definitions of words. And they did this that way they would forget the meaning, the thought, the ideas behind the original words, right? The original concepts. We've done this here in our world today. Right? That's why nobody knows anything about the Constitution. You know why? Because then they would be principled on that Constitution, those ideas, those ideologies, right, of liberty and all of that. That would be their principles. They wouldn't go against them. So they don't even teach anybody about the Constitution anymore. You know, why would they? Right? Why would they? to make you feel like you have, the right to pursue liberty and happiness and freedom. You have the right to bear arms and to protect and defend yourself. You have the right to assemble. You have the right to free speech, all of these things, right? See, they can do away with all of that, right? When we don't understand it, when we don't know it, when it's not a part of our principles in everyday life. Think about censorship now. Hate speech, right? Hate speech. It's the craziest shit I've ever seen, right? This shit is like out of a bad sci-fi movie. It truly is. The censoring and the deplatforming that takes place. Literally, in their ability to, to speak on anything, period. Hold on, let me check my battery here. All right. Yeah, their ability to speak on anything, to have an opinion on anything because they said the wrong thing, that a group of people don't like. It's just fucking nuts. So they're completely shut down forever, permanently. It's like how have we gotten to this point? How have we gotten to this point to where we've enslaved ourselves? We've enslaved ourselves. We've taken the bait in every way, shape, form, or facet. We've mistaken every, sexual promiscuity for freedom, right? Now, nobody can stay married or stay faithful or anything like that because it's so easy to not. And everybody's an entitled, selfish fuck, right? So the first time that they're not completely happy, right, they'll go out and fuck somebody else, right? Because they can. And they have the internet at the tip of their fingers. They can find somebody in 5 seconds. And people equate their happiness to commitment too, right? It's like, oh, I'm not happy. Well, welcome to the real world. Love isn't based on how you fucking feel, jerk off. Right? Love is a commitment. Love is a commitment. And if you're choosing your personal happiness over that commitment, which, is fleeting, right? Our emotions go up and fucking down. If that's, how you gauge whether or not you commit to something, like, for one, you're selfish and you're immature, right? Emotionally immature, underdeveloped. We've destroyed ourselves. We've destroyed our society. We've destroyed our morals. And that's why we've been captured. And that's why we're enslaved. We've done it with the technology, and we've done it with all the goodies, right, that we've been given. I am getting tired, and it looks like my phone's about to die, so I'm going to wrap this one up. I know it's a late one, so I appreciate you guys hanging out with me for the chat. I want to ask all of you guys to please donate and support to the channel. It is greatly appreciated for those of you that support me or will support me. I haven't been able to stream. I've had strikes and just, right now it's definitely needed and appreciated. So if anybody can help me, I would be grateful. PayPal.me, the Best Damn Podcast. Cash App, Best Damn Podcast. Facebook.com, John Keane, Best Damn Podcast. And Patreon.com, Best Damn Podcast Official. About $150, $125 away from the monthly goal. So try to help me reach that goal if you enjoy the lives and the guests and all that. And if you just appreciate what I do, please subscribe. Click the bell for notifications.